Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Moblite7 WalkSnail edition. Much like the HD0 edition, the motors are the same, the props are the same, the flight controller is the same. You'll notice on mine I changed the connector from PH20, there's more on that in a minute. But there are some differences, we're going to cover the differences and then do the prototypical flights that I always do in reviews. So the frames are obviously different. I believe this is the V3 Moblite7 frame. It's a much more hardy frame. It was also used in the Eachine trash can for those of you that were around during that time. And the canopy is also going to be different. This canopy is specific to the height of the HD0 camera, whereas this has been used on, say, the Crux 3 and other Happy Model based quads, as well as I think some Eachine. Obviously, one of the bigger differences is the video system, which I haven't really covered on the channel, but has made so much news I haven't really talked about it much myself. It's the WalkSnail or vTx digital video transmission system, which does have a nano camera on it as well. We will note the slight difference in the antennas. Here we have a whip without the metal protection on it versus this one does have the metal protection on it. One thing I do wish that they would have kind of just poked another hole in the back of the canopy and routed the antenna through there for a little bit of a cleaner look, because this can get in view, specifically when you're turtle moding. You know, it can flop down there in front of the camera a little bit. I have got a 2S edition of this essentially that I built, and you can see in mine, I poked a hole back there, put some E6000 back there, and makes a little bit of a cleaner look. I would have appreciated that. With this new frame, we also have a difference in our battery holder because they are both still 1S, and so this has a battery tray that is really made for 2S batteries, but you can see one of the issues that we could have is the height of the all-in-one is down far enough to where if we were to put our battery in here standard, it would have possibly made contact with the USB port, so they came up with this little 3D print adapter. Hopefully I can do this relatively simply here on camera. There we go. We just slide that up in there, and this holds the battery down away from the USB port. So kind of a little bit of an ingenious move to just kind of reuse known parts that we have in FPV. It did come stock with a PH20 connector, the solid pin. In some testing that I've been doing during my flights, I did switch over to a GNB27. I'm not necessarily advocating for GNB27. BT20 is very good as well. I believe the electrical throughput on those is very, very similar, if not the same. I just have a whole lot more GNB27 batteries that will fit in this sort of tray, so 450 milliamp and above. The WalkSnail edition with my GNB27 connector as well as the 3D print for the battery tray holding comes in at 34.5 grams. The HD0 edition with the PH20 connector on it comes in at 28, well, pretty much 29 grams. And for reference, the Meteor 75 WalkSnail edition from Beta FPV comes in at 39.5 grams. So a 5 gram difference between these two WalkSnail edition 75mm whoops. Of course, we have a circular polarized antenna on this one as well as a BT20. If you want to see a comparison or my thoughts between these two, let me know down in the comments section. I really didn't plan on that, but as always, I can be swayed depending upon the interest. As always, it does come with a screwdriver. It comes with the USB cable that we need to connect right down here to this port in order to get the recording that is recorded directly on the vTx off onto our computer. We also get a prop remover, an extra set of bi-blades, and 2 motor screws and 2 post screws or canopy screws. And you can see how long that canopy screw is. That sure does help firm up the post to make sure that center stack is nice and solid. Gonna do my damage report first. Broke the canopy right here. See, I got a little piece missing there. Well, that could affect weight too. It seems fairly solid, so I don't think it's broken all the way through. And I don't have any video problems with the camera jiggling about, even with that broken canopy. But do note, I did break it. And here is a look at all my recorded files. Of course, these are my flight audio camera. Sticks out there, and I do a sync clap. And then we have our goggle recording, or the DVR recording. And then the S files, the Avatar S files. These are the ones that recorded directly onto the vTx on the quad. We can get roughly 5, maybe even 7 flights, depending upon the length of the flight, onto that storage. But you do see that some of them aren't appearing as thumbnails. Unfortunately with these, if you run the voltage too low, the recording just stops and it doesn't finish. There may be a way to recover those, but I have not pursued that yet. And if you're wondering about the SRT files, this is where the Betaflight or OSD information is saved to. It doesn't look like we have on screen. It looks more like captioning. So I don't include that in my particular videos just because it's a pain in the tuchus. So you can see down there we have 226 items. I do have a folder up here of a few more flights that I have recorded. Those are the goggle recordings as well. So I've had a lot of flights. And I show you this image to start off with because this is on a 450 milliamp G&B PH20 battery. I wanted to stress that because I did spend a good portion of my first few days flying PH20. We can talk about why I switched over to G&B and the information that I passed on to Happy Model about potentially making changes over to alternate sources of Whoop type connectors for these HD based systems. So one of the things I want to pass on right away is that I think if you get this or you build one, don't bother with 1002 motors and bi-blades. I don't think it's worth it. I think if you hedge here a little bit. I did 10 flights with Jim Fan tri-blade on 40mm props. And with the 1.5mm motor shafts, there's very little risk, and we're going to be bending one of those motor posts with the tri-blades on there. And the flight time is either the same or it's actually longer with tri-blades. And that surprised me. Of course, that's over the course of about 10 inside flights. I did not do 10 outside flights to compare that. But props are a cheap and easy thing that we can do, and it's going to help you corner at speed. It's actually going to lower your hover value a little bit. And in the case of this one, I just don't think running 1002 motors and bi-blade props has got any advantage. I think the premise that we generally have with bi-bladed props and gaining efficiency just doesn't hold true once we get to this motor size in our whoops. So that's one of the first things I would recommend anyone who's either got the HD0 or the WalkSnail version of the Moblite7. Go ahead and just put tri-blades on it. You know, maybe take a few flights, get a feel for it, see what you think. Maybe you're happy with it and you don't need to bother. But otherwise, you know, safely go to you can safely go to the tri-bladed props. It's not going to rocket to the moon. It's not going to throw the PID tune way off to where you have flight control issues or issues coming down out of the air. It's going to help you corner. It's going to be a little bit more crisp with less stick input, and it's possibly going to increase your flight time. Again, my flight time was either the same or anywhere from 7 to 12 seconds longer on the same sort of batteries inside. So it's definitely not going to, in my opinion, it's not going to hurt your pleasure, fun, or your flight performance in any way. So I would just go to it. Now, the other thing is that, you know, we'll bring the weight down quite a bit. HD0 is still going to be lighter, as we've already shown. But we'll have to finish up the rest of our talking points as our flight has ended. That inside flight on PH20 was 2 minutes and 21 seconds. And here is the beginning of our GNB27 flight. Of course, it's a different battery because it's natively got GNB27, but it is still a GNB battery. And then we're going to go for this flight. This flight is going to be 2 minutes and 32 seconds. So we gain some flight time by just switching from PH20 to GNB27. What did I say? 11 seconds. And I felt much more comfortable flying this connector. The throughput or the way it performs over the course of the battery is more consistent. Those that are familiar with flying 1S, the deeper you get into the battery, or as the battery voltage tends to go down, the more throttle and input you have to give it to get it to respond in the same way that it does at the beginning of the battery. So with a higher throughput connector that's more consistent for a longer period of time, which does allow you the ability to fly how you want to fly, whether that's to fly fast or fly cruisy or to do various tricks. It's going to be more consistent, and when it comes to flying, especially learning to fly, consistency is going to be fairly important to you. I did pass along to Happy Model my findings about the GNB connector. I did not pass along my findings of the tri-blades, although I will do that before I post this video. Again, I don't think it's worth running bi-blades on 1002 motors. So if you've got a build out there and you found out differently, I'd be interested to know. Of course, I had a fair number of crashes. Generally speaking, when I get to about the 2-minute flight time in a lot of my flights inside, whether it's for review purposes or not, I either get sloppy, lose my focus, or just get my lines off and I end up with a crash. But you know, with all the different flights that I've had, so you can be assured that the damage that I reported in the initial quick specs. Yeah, over probably about 60 flights inside and another 15 or so outside. The first 4 outside, I don't know what I was doing. I just kept flying and doing little silly things to where I would get tangled up in a bush, or I would get too low and I would hit the grass, or I would get distracted. But we could talk more about that when we get to the outside flight, which will be coming up next after this particular flight. I also think on the GMB27 connector, even with more flight time, I think I'm flying more aggressively. So that tends to burn through our battery a little bit more quicker. You know, the faster we fly, the longer or the less time we have in flight, generally speaking, when all other things are equal. So this flight on the GMB27 is, in my opinion, faster, and it's actually a little bit longer. So again, if you're up for soldering a touch, yeah, I'd change that out. Now here at the end of the flight, see how it's getting staticky? The voltage is getting low, and we need to come into land. I had mine set at 3.23 volts, so when I got down to about that voltage, I needed to bring it in. Let's move along to that outside flight. Okay, so this is actually kind of in the morning, mid-morning. I think I had taken our youngest to tennis, and I came back, and before I got started with all the leaves again, that I went for a few flights. I think this flight session was only probably about 6 flights long, and I ended up using this particular flight out of it. I had another flight session, but there was more wind. I kind of wanted to do a big reveal between the yard being cleaned up and prior to it being cleaned up, but I just, once I got done on this particular day of doing all the leaf cleanup, I was spent and it was dark, and I still had some up front to do. So I did not do a big reveal of before and after when it came to the cleanup. Again, when I do leaves, I start up the fire pit and burn as many leaves off as I can, so I'm not putting a whole bunch of bags out at the corner for the trash men to pick up. Helps them out a little bit. But in a calm day like we have here, you can even fly whoops, and in my opinion, this is all my opinion, you can fly whoops comfortably outside with 7 to 9 mile an hour winds. Of course, that's going to depend. In my case, I might have winds that are 10 to 15 miles an hour pretty much all the time, if not greater. But because we have the house that's protecting us from the wind and the trees and the neighborhood and the fence, so the quad isn't feeling every mile of that wind. So it's definitely flyable in my area when I have winds 7 to 15 miles an hour, but generally below 15 is kind of my whoop flying time. We've done some sprints around the yard a little bit, and then we do some close proximity stuff, which I think kind of follows suit for how a good many or a majority of people fly whoops in spaces. You might take them to a playground and go in and out the playground equipment and through the tubes, or you might have other sorts of outdoor small spaces that you like to fly these things around. Otherwise, you probably have an unprop protected quad that you like to use for outside flight that is a bit more aggressively. I kind of did some tree surfing for one of 2 reasons. One, I wanted to see, we can focus on those tree branches to see what we can see, part of the WalkSnail video system, and we also get a good look at the camera and how stable the image is. That's something that a lot of people are sensitive to. Here at the end, we're going to kind of do a sloppy orbit around my fire pit. You can see the day prior I had scooped up a bunch into the fire pit, and then I'll throw a couple of logs in there, start that on fire, and that will start my process in cleaning up all the leaves in the backyard. And it took all day, out back, 7+ hours. Got to clean the pool cover, got to clean along the fence line, just a lot of work. As we bonk up there upside down, that concludes our flights in this particular review. So keep in mind, with the WalkSnail video system, you need to have either the new Fat Shark Dominator goggles, or you need to have the other WalkSnail goggles that are being sold by various resellers. They all kind of look like this. The Fat Sharks have this white and gray color scheme. Of course, I've got luminaire antennas on mine. You can also find these in all black from various resellers. Those are, I believe, just branded the WalkSnail goggles. They may have another name. It's just escaping me right now, and I don't have them. So you need to have these goggles in order to fly the WalkSnail video system. Very important to note because other goggles just won't work. Okay, so one thing that we could do outside of the changes that I already suggested was we can snip this off. Take some side cutters and just clip this off just like I did on this one. You can see where these used to be there. I just clipped those off. They used that in a previous iteration, and they put an LED board right down in those slots. We don't have that. You can add that LED board if you want. Add LEDs of your own, but I would just clip those off. Just it saves a touch bit of weight. And you know, when it comes to weight, every bit we can save gives us a little bit more fun. It's also interesting to note how they routed the motor wires. Again, with this particular board, it does not have connectors. They've made it super small, so your motors are going to have to be soldered. So if you do break a motor or you snap a motor wire or something of that nature, you will have to do some soldering. I would encourage you to take everything out and then do your soldering. Trying to solder down in there, while I've done it, it's not a fun process. I think it's actually, as far as the time goes, it's going to be about the same doing it outside, taking everything out and doing it outside the frame that it is trying to solder back within the frame. This is really ingenious. I hadn't thought of something like this, but it worked out quite well. It was a little bit of a pain in the tuchus because it does have a tendency to just fall out of there. So you need to keep track of that. I'm sure someone will replicate this print, and sometimes I have problems getting it in, as you can see here. There we go. But that's pretty ingenious to take this essentially 2S battery tray and make it compatible for 1S. Speaking of batteries, I was flying these G&Bs. I also tested the Flywoos. I couldn't tell you which 450 I was on because I kind of used all of them. I also tested 530s, which came in at marginally more flight time, marginally more, maybe about the same, depends on your flight. 650s got me 5 minutes of cruising inside and 4 minutes of faster flight. This is the purple ones. Here they are. So 4 minutes of going faster inside and 5 minutes of more cruisy, close proximity sort of flight. Originally, I started on PH20, of course, just as I noted in those flight footage. I did find that with the Xylos, probably because the Xylos are my newest PH20 450 batteries, I got the flight time that you saw in that video. With my other batteries, they have had a lot more flights through them. The flight time was generally less. Of course, you could put BT20 on your quads and run that way. It's a very popular connector. The only reason why I didn't go to BT20 was, one, at the time, I did not have any more connectors on hand to switch to, and I just don't have that many 450 BT20, and 450s are only available from Beta FPV natively with these connectors. But We Bleed FPV just launched a series of batteries, and I do have some on the way that are BT20, and they are 450 milliamps, so those should work out well. But I know Heads over at Infinity Loops, he has taken a few flights on those We Bleed FPV batteries, and he seemed to have a pretty positive experience so far. So we'll see how time tells with those new batteries, you know. I'll put them through my typical paces, and if I find something worth noting, maybe make a short or just a community post or something. So stay tuned, stay subscribed if you're interested in that sort of information. I'm told that Dogcom does also make a 450 BT20, but I have yet to find them available to purchase. So, yet again, another reason why I went to the G&B is G&B batteries with G&B connectors are available pretty widely and easy to get, and I have way more than you see here. So back to the quad. As far as putting tri-blades on here, it does, because the tri-blades, I have them sitting right over here, have a little bit of a different profile on them. They tend to run a little bit closer. So if you're really concerned about your prop being super close to either our wire connectors over here or our button, which is right over here, it wasn't a concern for me because it clears just fine, although it will bring the prop closer, and you can see my prop strikes here on the inside. That is from when I had these tri-blades on. The gem fans happen to be the ones I use. Use your preferred 40mm tri-blade. Remember, if you're purchasing, you need to get them in a motor shaft of 1.5mm because that's what we've got on these motors, which are the same on the HD0 version as they are on the WalkSnail version. I have heard of people breaking this canopy, and for the first time, I broke this one inside. But of course, oh yeah, I did break it all the way through too. Now I get my fingernail underneath there. It's still fine. I would just throw some E6000 on that or some welders. Welders is my preferred adhesive because it stays pliable. I think E6000 does as well. The problem with E6000 is it seems to be E6000 comes in a kind of a lot of different flavors, so to speak. So I tend to stick with welders, and it's always linked down in the video description. I buy it in packs of 2 from Amazon. They did recently change the packaging from red, or excuse me, the tube color from red to white. I mentioned it previously, I would prefer to see this antenna routed out the back, you know, just like in the case of my 2S edition. Just take my soldering iron, poke a hole, and route the antenna up through there, which I think is a cleaner look. But it is what we've got. If you didn't see my Meteor 75 WalkSnail edition review, getting the recordings off of the vTx itself is slow. I don't know if it's the speed of the storage on the board or if it's just this connector and its throughput abilities, but it is slow. It takes a good 10 to 15 minutes to get your 6 or maybe even 7 files off of this onto your computer. So and you do have to have it powered during that time. So of course it's important whenever we're powering these micro HD vTx's, we need some sort of fan to be circulating the air on it, keep it from getting overheated and damaged. I'm not certain they would get damaged, but they definitely would get probably overheated and start the thermal shutdown. That could impede our ability to get the data off the board. So if you want to see a comparison with the Meteor 75, again, let me know. I can prepare some sort of comparison sort of video. I probably wouldn't redo the flight footage side of things. I would probably fly it some more, and I could possibly pick out new flight footage. Who knows? That it's always a time-intensive thing when you're doing a bunch of flights and you've got 40 to 60 files you're going to look through to see if, you know, what's usable, what's not. Did anything interesting happen? Was there a quirk that you need to call out? So it's time. You know, it's time. It takes time to do that sort of stuff, but I might. You never know. I enjoy flying inside, and I fly inside a lot. But if you do want to see a comparison video between these two, because they are the only two whoops that are bind and flying currently available on the market, so you might want to know at least my thoughts between the two. Let me know down in the comment section. I did pass along to Happy Model, if I didn't mention it already, that I think when it comes to even HD0, if it comes to HD-based whoops, we need to get off the PH20 connector. The power demands of these systems, especially with 1002 motors, it just creates a lot of voltage sag, and we can help ourselves a lot by going to a higher throughput connector, whether it's GNB27 or BT20. I suspect if they do make that change, it's going to be to GNB27. There's nothing that says that we can't lop that off and put in a BT20 if that's your preferred connector. I just think we have to move past PH20 when it comes to these HD whoops. The battery sag is just tremendous. It shortens your flight time. It decreases your overall performance. It's just we've gone beyond the limits of that PH20 connector. It works great, or it works good for analog-based whoops, but I think by the time you get to 75mm HD and 1002 motors, we need to go to a higher throughput connector. And I did pass that on to Happy Model, so we'll see. Maybe they'll even make a change on this particular one. Who knows? I don't know. They didn't confirm or deny. They just asked me for some feedback on it. This one does come in ExpressLRS and FrSky. I would highly encourage you to go with the ExpressLRS. I understand if you've got FrSky and you're just not looking to dive into ExpressLRS that you choose to go, but do know that your range and your control link is going to be different, and therefore your experience is going to be slightly different. Flew FrSky SPI D8 mode for a long time. They're claiming D16 compatibility with this particular board. I have not tested that. And if you have troubles with D16 binding on these boards, move over to D8 if you have that ability. Of course, if you're using an FrSky radio, there's all sorts of other mess that would have to be sorted out. The price on this is $232.99 at the time of this recording, and I'm looking at the Banggood price. There could be other prices available. It could be available from other stores as well. I will link where I can find it down in the video description. I think the first thing you should do if you should get one is to change out your connector to GNB27 or to BT20 and hop on buy blades. Remember, the leading edge of the high side of the prop should lead the turn. So you can see here, this motor rotates this way, this motor rotates this way, this motor rotates this way. So the high side of the prop needs to lead that. So when you swap out the props, just do one at a time and just match them up. Then you won't have to worry about the ESC or motor rotation configuration. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.